It was a playoff rematch between the Carolina Hurricanes and the New Jersey Devils. And similar to what happened in round 2, the Devils came out on the losing end, so they couldn't get their vengeance this time around. But it wasn't their worst performance of the season. And one player stayed ready. And unfortunately, Lindy Ruff is now the victim of the injury plague. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils Rider for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Before we recap this game in which the New Jersey Devils came out on the losing end against the Carolina Hurricanes by a score of 3-2, I first and foremost want to thank you guys, because my previous video in which I talked about Michael McLeod, Cal Foote, and what's been transpiring the last few days, it is on pace, if not already, to become my most popular video on YouTube. And overwhelmingly, you guys showed a lot of love, especially in the comments section, saying that I handled it very professionally, saying you were moved by it. And I can't thank you guys enough for your great support in that sort of circumstance, because that is the first time in nearly 4 years of me hosting this show in which I had to cover a dark subject involving the Devils. Now, like I said, we'll get more information within the next few weeks when things start to become more public and more official. But for the time being, I'm glad that you guys tuned into that video, and I'm glad that I was able to educate any of you who needed to be caught up on the circumstance, because it transpired almost 6 years ago. So I know a lot of people might have not been fully aware of what happened and what unfortunate circumstances led up to it. But once again, just wanted to thank you guys a million for your great support. I wish my most popular video on YouTube was for a more positive discussion, but it is what it is. Now, I know that everyone has their respective feelings on the matter, and I know it's still relatively new. And I just want to put this into the light, because if I've learned anything covering sports teams, being in the locker room for the Devils or interviewing certain players in different leagues, at the end of the day, athletes are human. So all the feelings that everyone is feeling for a time being, confusion, sadness, angry, or maybe some people are on the other spectrum of it, I don't really know. Everyone has some sort of feelings towards the situation, and the same can be said for the players. So I'm sure they're clouded with emotion right now. They're just trying to go about as business as usual, but it's really hard, because this isn't a situation in which they're an outside perspective. No, this is a situation that involves their organization and a couple of their teammates. So I'm sure they had some heavy hearts, clouded minds heading into this matchup, but I just want to put that into the light that athletes are humans at the end of the day. So I'm hoping that the Devils roster, they're talking to people behind the scenes. Hopefully they're able to go about business as usual, but I just wanted to be somewhat empathetic towards the Devils in this sort of case. Now, once again, in a playoff rematch from last year in which the Devils lost to the Carolina Hurricanes in 5, the Devils once again came out on the losing end 3-2. So in today's post-game recap, in the first segment, I will share some of my main talking points from the game. And then in the second segment, I'll highlight some players that kind of caught my eye. And we'll also talk about Lindy Ruff and his injury situation. I know the irony isn't lost. I'm convinced that this season is cursed at this point with the amount of injuries that the Devils have had to deal with this year. And then in the third and final segment, like I do with every post-game recap, I will compare the stats and give the Devils a letter grade. So like I said in yesterday's episode, the Devils were going to make some corresponding moves in wake as to what happened with Michael McLeod and Cal Foote. So the day leading up to me recording this episode, it's been hectic to say the least, because Dougie Hamilton, he's on LTIR. The Devils claimed a player off waivers. There was a player that was called up from Utica and made his season debut as a Devil, and he actually scored in this game. So we'll talk about him in the second segment. But needless to say that it's been a whirlwind of moves made by Tom Fitzgerald in wake as to what's been happening. And on top of that, the Devils still had to play a game. So while we're on the subject of playoff rematches, the Devils can never make it easy on themselves because they were thrown a bone yesterday when this episode goes live because the New York Islanders lost to the Montreal Canadiens and the Flyers got shut out by the Detroit Red Wings. So when we look at the standings and how things are shaking up for the time being, the Devils are still fourth in the Metro. They have 51 points, but the same can be said for the Islanders, and the Flyers have 56. So the Flyers are currently on a 4-game losing streak, and the Islanders are also on a 2-game losing streak. The Capitals are on a 3-game losing streak, and the Penguins are on a 2-game losing streak. Now, I understand the injury circumstances for the Devils. It's been an up and down year for them, but you really got to take advantage of this opportunity. But nonetheless, the Devils only have 1 game remaining before we head into the All-Star break. But I'm just saying the Devils could have separated themselves by a couple of points between them and the Islanders, and they could have just creeped up on the Flyers just a little bit more. But as things currently sit, they are 4 points behind the Detroit Red Wings for a spot in the wild card. So Devils can never make it easy on themselves. But in this game against the Hurricanes, it sort of confirms a point that I brought up in my previous post-game recap, in which the Devils came away with an upset victory over the reigning Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights, which is the Devils are going to have to rely heavily on their offense while they're missing some key assets, particularly Jack Hughes. Because the thing is like, yes, Andre Palat did return in this game, and it wasn't the most flashy performance, let's just put it politely, but he's coming back from injury. But at the end of the day, the Devils' defense needs a lot of work. The goaltending is shaky. So I said that the Devils are going to have to play an unorthodox style of hockey in which they win in a barn burner. So that previous game against the Golden Knights, they scored 6 goals, but the Devils allowed 5 goals in response. And remember, the Devils had to take in an OT to secure the victory. So like I said, it's not a recipe for championships, but while your star player is out and while you're missing a lot of depth pieces, especially on defense, the Devils are just going to have to keep their head above water and try to rack up these wins the best they can. And like I said in the previous post-game recap, if anybody could use a break heading into the All-Star game festivities, it's the Devils. So here's the thing. The Hurricanes were playing the second game of a back-to-back, and Antti Raanta was in between the pipes for the Hurricanes. Yes, the same Raanta that was sent down to the AHL a good while back early on in the year. He was actually somewhat phenomenal in net for the Hurricanes. How do I know this? Well, the NHL named him the first star of the game. So the Devils just couldn't really generate anything on Raanta, especially in the first half of the second period, because the Devils didn't get a single shot on him. And that was one of the X factors heading into this matchup, which is you got to force Raanta to work. And unfortunately, the Devils didn't get off to a good start, but their third period was actually pretty solid because they generated more shots on Raanta and they were able to find the back of the net a couple times, but their valiant effort was too little, too late. So I would say this game wasn't really all that bad for the Devils. It wasn't their worst performance ever, but something that the Devils really got to work on, especially after the All-Star break, is that they got to work on not allowing the first goal of the game, because Sebastian Aho scored within the first 90 seconds of the game. That cannot happen. The Devils cannot continue to trail early in the game and play a game of catch-up, because I said it last year and I'm saying it again this year. That's not a recipe for success. And then I would, like I said, it wasn't the worst performance in the world for the Devils, but they just had a few brain farts that came back to bite them. So Tara Vinen, he scored a power play goal in the second period, and it's worth mentioning that he scored 2 seconds in to the Canes' power play. I was like, did that really just happen? I know the Devils' penalty kill, for lack of a better term, is suckish this year, but that is the epitome of really bad. And moments later, Jordan Staal made it a 3-0 game after that power play. So it was just a series of bad events for the Devils in a very short amount of time. Now, to the Devils' credit, Lindy Ruff did try to challenge the third goal of the game by the Hurricanes because he thought that Seth Jarvis high-sticked a Devils player, and it was an unsuccessful challenge. And, man, Lindy Ruff has some sort of gripe against Alexander Holtz, because guess who had to sit during that penalty kill? Because as we all know, if the challenge is unsuccessful, you got to pick one player to send to the penalty box for the next 2 minutes, and it was Alexander Holtz. So the memes of Lindy Ruff, quote unquote, hating Alexander Holtz, I don't think they're ever going to go away. But it was 3-0 Hurricanes, and the Devils made a valiant effort in the third period to try to come back. And we'll talk more about that in the second segment. But the one final thing I want to highlight in this segment is that it seemed like the Devils' defensive problems really doomed their goalies, because Nico Dawes, he got the start in between the pipes for the Devils. And then after the Hurricanes went up 3-0, Lindy Ruff said it's time for a momentum shift. So he inserted Vitek Vanecek into the lineup, which, aside from his playoff performance last year, he actually does have a pretty solid track history against the Hurricanes. And I'm not going to put the loss on Nico Dawes' shoulders. And before any of you leave a comment, if you're watching on YouTube, I have done the same thing for Vitek Vanecek in the past before. I think I'm very fair when it comes to assessing the problems for the Devils, whether it's a defensive problem or a goaltending problem. In this case, I think it was a defensive problem for the Devils, because once again, their PK failed them because the Devils just did not know how to clear the puck. And when you don't clear the zone, you're giving your opposition more lives. They're like a cat with 9 lives, and they're using up those 9 lives in a very short amount of time. And then you got tired bodies on the rink. So fatigue is playing a big factor in that. And we've seen it happen before in previous games in which the Devils, they just don't know how to clear the puck. They are having full pressure on them, and they don't know how to tightrope out of these snafus or situations. And as a result, they have to rely on their goaltending, which is shaky at best. But in this case, once again, Devils defense, just not all that good, because how do you allow a goal within the first 90 seconds of the game? How do you allow a power play goal 2 seconds into the opposition's respective power play? How do you allow Jordan Staal to score just moments after? It's not a knock to Tara Vinen. It's not a knock to Staal. It's not a knock to Aho, but it's just like, it just speaks testament as to how bad the Devils defense has been. And it goes back to the point that I made in the previous post-game recap, which is Devils have to rely on their offense and just their offense, because they can't really rely on anything else. So we're going to talk about some players I want to highlight, and also Lindy Ruff's injury circumstance momentarily. But before we continue, I want to tell you guys about FanDuel. So the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, find bets in the new Explorers tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL, or the Taylor Swift League, however you want to call it. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of storylines that caught my eye during the course of the game. So as you guys know, for a post-game recap after a defeat, I don't do my 3 stars of the game, but that's not to say that there aren't some players that deserve some recognition. So the first player that I want to recognize is Luke Hughes. So according to Alex Chavancy, who covers the Devils independently, he said Luke Hughes at 5-on-5 tonight, 91.07 expected goals percentage, 17-2 edge in scoring chances, 11-1 advantage in high danger chances. He also added and said, after a few rough games, he's looked quite good this week. So Luke Hughes, I think, has been one of the Devils' best defensemen the past few games, alongside with Shimon Nemeth. And the fact that Nemeth is doing pretty solid, and the same can be said for Luke Hughes, I'm really excited to see their overall development in the future. But the one gripe that I have against Luke Hughes is that his production on the power play, very bad. In fact, the Devils' power play execution in general, not really all that good, because you knew that they weren't going to score when they went on the man advantage. What was their main problem? They couldn't get into their offensive end. Their zone entries were horrendously bad. And I guess I got to give a lot of credit to the defense for the Hurricanes for shutting down the door early and making sure that the Devils don't set up shop, because I think the Devils can take a thing or two out of the playbook of the Hurricanes, which is that's how you play defense. That's how you make sure your opponent doesn't play to their strengths, because I think one of the main strengths that's been pretty good for the Devils at certain parts of the season, depending who's out there, is their power play. And unfortunately, their power play really couldn't set up shop, and it took them a while to get going. So, yeah, that's my only gripe against Luke Hughes, but it's not just him. But it goes back to what I've said before. Maybe the Devils could have had some help from a former Hurricanes player, Dougie Hamilton, because I think Dougie Hamilton and his impact is heavily missed, especially on the power play. Now, let's talk about an interesting storyline, which is Justin Dowling scoring in this game and making his Devils debut and getting his first career goal as a Devil. Not his first career goal, period. His first career goal in a Devils sweater. So Dowling, I would say, was the Devils' best forward in terms of creating decent looks for himself. And this is not a knock to him, but he shouldn't be that player that's having that sort of game. Like, it should be like the Devils' top line of Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, and Timo Meier, but obviously they had their respective struggles throughout the course of the game. But still, it shouldn't take away from the fact that Dowling was very solid for the Devils, especially given the circumstances, because he was one of the corresponding moves made by the Devils in wake what's been going on the last few days, and he stayed ready. He was prepared, and he came into the game, and like I said, there's just no better way to describe it. He was ready, and he knew that his number was going to be called, and he scored a pretty good goal thanks to Alexander Holtz and Shimon Nemeth setting him up on it. And also worth mentioning that he was the reason why the Devils did not get shut out. Now, how did the Devils get their second goal of the game? Well, it was because the final few seconds were waning down, and despite being adamant about it, Jesper Bratt actually scored the goal and not Tyler Toffoli, but it was too little too late. Like I said, the Devils should have done that like when there was 5 or so minutes remaining. They just had to like try to amount the comeback piece by piece by piece, but unfortunately, the third period and their luck in that period just wasn't really there. But this does lead to another interesting topic that I want to bring up on this show, which is Lindy Ruff took a puck to the face towards the end of the second period. Now, he was adamant to stay behind the bench, and he finished off the second period like a trooper, but he did not return in period 3. So I think he had to do the NHL protocol for concussions, and he was not given the green light to return behind the bench. And in fact, post-game interviews, it was Travis Green who was conducting them because, as you guys know, usually Lindy Ruff will always speak to the media post-game, but in this case, it was Travis Green carrying the load in this sort of manner. Now, a lot of people have their own opinions on Lindy Ruff. Personally, I've always defended him on this show, but people will always find some sort of narrative or storyline to like discredit him or condescend him. And the one thing I always say is that I don't agree with everything Lindy Ruff does, but I don't think he deserves to have his job in jeopardy or anything like that. But it was clear that the Devils played a much better game in period 3. That was a clear-cut fact. That was their best period, and case in point, they scored 2 goals in that period, and they did try to amount the comeback, but the Hurricanes were just the better team in this circumstance. Now, a lot of people were saying like, oh, Travis Green is behind the bench, and look how the team is responding. I'm here to debunk your narrative. It's an interesting narrative, but MSG actually put up an interesting stat during the telecast. So I put this out on social media as well, but this isn't the first time in which the Devils have attempted a comeback in the third period. In fact, they're one of the top teams in the NHL for comeback victories in the third period. And that interesting tidbit was courtesy of MSG. So it isn't the first time in which the Devils have tried to amount a comeback in the third period. In fact, they're one of the best teams in the NHL in that regards. I believe they were sitting at 6 comeback behind victories. They were trying to extend it to 7, but came up empty. So I know, like I said, a lot of you try to discredit Lindy Ruff, but in that case, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I have to debunk that narrative, and that you're just paying a little extra attention now since Lindy Ruff is not behind the bench. So I respect the hustle, but I have to suppress it. So yeah, Lindy Ruff will be behind the bench for the Devils for the foreseeable future. Now, will he come back in the game against the Lightning, which is on Saturday? I don't really know. It depends on like the severity of his injury. But given the fact that it's the final game before the All-Star break, he's up there in age. I don't I would say probably no. I can't confirm or deny that, but I better to be safe than sorry. And I'm convinced that this season is cursed for the Devils in terms of injuries because they could just not catch a break. Now their head coach is injured. Of all people on the roster, Lindy Ruff now falls victim to the injury bug. So yeah, that's where we stand. Now, before we close off today's episode and compare the stats and give the Devils a letter grade, let me tell you guys about Indeed to help jumpstart your business. So if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast, F-A-S-T. Ditch the busy work, use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. So leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. So listeners of the show can get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just head over to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support Locked On Devils by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Okay, let's compare the stats, give the Devils a letter grade, and get out of here. So shots on goal differential, 25-23 in favor of the Devils. That's actually very impressive considering the fact that the Devils didn't generate a shot on Ronta more than halfway done with period 2. So their offense was stagnant at parts of the game, but once again, not their worst performance. Face-off percentage. Now, for obvious reasons, expect this number to go down a little bit more as the season progresses and as what's been going on. But face-off percentage, 56.9% to the Hurricanes, 43.1% to the Devils. So I would say, yeah, that's going to hurt the Devils a little bit. Power play percentage, Hurricanes were 1 for 4, Devils were 0 for 3. Keep in mind that the Devils had an abbreviated power play late in the game. Hits, 17 a pop. Block shots, 14-7 in favor of the Hurricanes. Giveaways, Hurricanes led the department 14-13. Takeaways, Hurricanes led that category as well, 14-11. So, like I've been saying throughout the course of the episode, I don't think it's the Devils' worst game of the season. They could have played a little bit better, but let's just do a brief recap once again. So, first 5 to 6 minutes, not really the Devils' best performance, especially giving up the first goal of the game to Sebastian Aho relatively early, but they started to settle on down. Second period, first half of that period, not really good, like throw it away, but they got a little bit better. And then the third period, that was their best period, and that was their best attempt of a comeback, but too little, too late. So if I had to give the Devils a letter grade, I will give them a C-. I'm not going to give them a D because they did make a decent comeback. It just fell short, and they just got to try to make the comeback a little early on in the game. So we'll see what happens in the final game before the All-Star break. Once again, Devils got to rely on their offense. Goaltending and defense ain't going to carry them. So they're not in a position to win 2-1 or 1-0 or something like that. Unfortunately, they got to win like 6-3 or something like that. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Curious your guys' thoughts. So hit me up on my personal X page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X page app at Locked On Devils. And as I do to close out every show, continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day in New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.